For the first session today, we invited two very interesting speakers, and I'm very happy that you both accepted to be here. Christina von Braun from Berlin and DENIS ROJO, also known under the name of Jaromil, who both will speak about money from very different perspectives. And we entitled the entire session From Coin to Bit. So from material coins, let's say, to whatever it means, immaterial bit coins. Some organizational stuff. We will first have the lecture by Christina von Braun. Then, if you have very urgent questions to Christina von Braun, we will accept them, but we should really keep all the questions for the discussion after the two lectures, because I think it will be very interesting to discuss the two positions together in a common discussion. Actually, Michal Kozlowski from Warsaw, who's a philosopher and a professor at the University of Warsaw, will actually co-moderate the discussion with me after the two lectures. I would now like to introduce Christina von Braun. She is a full professor of cultural history and theory at Humboldt University in Berlin since '94, and she has been visiting professor in the US, in Israel, in France, and in Austria at various universities. Her fields of research are gender and the history of writing, religion and modernity, the history of anti-Semitism. She is the author of more than 50 films, so she's also a filmmaker, mainly documentaries, essays and fictions, and she wrote a lot of books, and perhaps I only mention the most recent one, which is called The Price of Money, Der Preis des Geldes, which was published in 2012. She was head of the Department of Gender Studies at the Humboldt University and directed a PhD program on gender as category of knowledge. Since 2012, she is the academic director of the Center for Jewish Studies, Berlin-Brandenburg, and she was recently, so in the year 2013, awarded the Sigmund Freud Prize of the German Psychoanalytical Association. Sorry, that's the difficult word. The German Psychoanalytical Association. Okay, welcome very much, Christina von Braun. I'm very happy that you accepted our invitation, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Inke, for the introduction and for inviting me here. There's one thing, the whole discussion about the crisis of money right now, there's one thing which irritates me a lot. We often talk about it as though it's the others who are doing all the bad business. And we reflect very little why we ourselves go along with this whole situation, why we sort of support a lot of what is going on. And so my talk is going to try and show some of the points why we are quite deeply, historically and culturally implicated in something that holds us right into our feelings, into our emotionality, and I will try to explain some of the aspects of this. When we refer to money as a means of exchange or payment or standard or repository of value, we are only referring to the functions of money. We are not referring to what money is. The money we deal with could be described best as a writing system. Counting tokens, for instance, for example, for the number of a sheep in a flock, represented an early form of bookkeeping, and today theorists of the history of writing consider that writing developed out of the necessity of bookkeeping when larger agricultural spaces developed and temples or palaces had to administer these. Such lumps of clay, as this one for instance, symbolized goods, services and debt or property relations. They also circulated as a currency. Later clay tablets showed more modern forms of bookkeeping. The close relationship between money and writing explains why the two systems continue to develop parallel to one another. The first coins were minted 150 years after the introduction of the alphabet in Greece. When the printing press was invented, the first paper money soon followed. This is paper money from Norway, and you can see they took a lot of trouble to seal it and to make it credible. Today, as we communicate with one another by email, money also circulates as an electronic impulse. It's true both historically and today that the regions where you have the most intensive written communication coincide with the most intense circulation of money. And since money became increasingly abstract and uncertain in this process, coins were followed by bills of exchange, checks, and then by stocks and paper money, and nowadays electronic bits. The question of trust and credibility became ever more pressing. Now, there are three ways of certifying money. One is the authorization by a sovereign. A coin is minted as the symbol of a city. This is Pallas Athene and her symbol, the owl, which certified the ancient coins of Athens. The power of these figures certified the money itself. So here too, money follows its proximity to writing. Alexander the Great was the first ruler to replace the portrait of the deity with his own, and the Roman emperors followed his example. But soon, sovereigns abused their power of issuing currencies to make a profit. This began already in antiquity and continued throughout history. In 1303 alone, France reduced the silver content of its coins by more than 50%, I quote. At times, French revenues from currency manipulation exceeded that from all other sources, including taxes. During the reign of Henry VIII and his successor Edward VI, the English pound lost 83% of its silver content. And finally, the certification of money by the sovereign lost its credibility, and all monetary theories of the last 800 years have faced this problem. In 1977, Friedrich von Hayek argued for a general abolition of national currencies. I quote, "When one studies the history of money, one cannot help wondering why people should have put up for so long with governments exercising an exclusive power over 2,000 years that was regularly used to exploit and defraud them." And this is exactly the question we should be asking ourselves. Now, secondly, money is certified by material entities such as grain or cattle. The word shekel comes from the Akkadian and means to weigh. The Latin word for money, pecunia, is derived from pecus, cattle, and our term capital also refers to the head in a herd of cattle, and the young ones of this herd are the interest of this capital. Among the material entities, land was considered the guarantee of greatest security and thus eligible to the highest liquidity premium, to use an expression of Keynes. This was due to its seeming imperishability, but this insurance is quite misleading. The amount of land can be increased, for example, by irrigation or drainage, or it can disappear, for example, through global warming and rising sea levels. The precariousness of land appears to be one of the reasons why it was in the Netherlands, of all places, that trade in virtual commodities began to flourish so early on. 1/3 of Holland's land mass is below sea level. The belief in virtual commodities showed clearly in the tulip speculation of 1635, while this speculation began with actual tulip bulbs. They were soon traded solely on the basis of pictures in catalogues. Slips of paper indicating property transfers were passed from hand to hand, and I quote, "Florists sold tulips they could not deliver to buyers who did not have the cash to pay for them and who had no desire ever to plant them." End of quotation. It's no coincidence that the first stock exchange was established in Amsterdam. Holland was also the first country to turn to art into an alternative currency. The famous English diarist John Evelyn, who traveled through Europe in the 17th century, visited Rotterdam in August 1641 and was impressed by the many pictures for sale at a fair there. Quote, "The reason of this store of pictures and their cheapness proceeds from their want of land to employ their stock, so that it is an ordinary thing to find a common farmer lay out 2,000 or 3,000 pounds in this commodity. The houses are full of them and they vend them at their fairs to very great gains." End of quotation. There was also another reason why landed property no longer offered security. In the 18th century, parallel to the introduction of paper money, it became a commodity. Bravo. Okay, so the commercialization of land had consequences that the anthropologist Karl Polanyi describes in his great book on the history of industrialization, The Great Transformation. Traditionally, he writes, land was associated with kinship, neighborhood, craft and creed, with tribe and temple, village, guild and church. And to take this element of nature, isolate it and form a market for it was perhaps the weirdest of all the undertakings of our ancestors. End of quotation. On the other hand, the introduction of paper money had a great influence on social mobility and the rise of democracy. This was already true for money in antiquity, where slaves who dealt deftly with money could gain freedom, and this effect became ever more important with paper money. Some of the first banknotes were created in North America. They brought independence from the English motherland. The banknotes were backed by tobacco, even in states like New Jersey. I have it here, but this is... Even in states like New Jersey, where no tobacco is grown. In France, on the advice of the Scotsman John Law, the crown issued paper money in 720, which was allegedly backed by land in France's American colonies and their rich mineral resources. When doubts arose concerning the existence of these resources, the currency collapsed within a few weeks and great fortunes dissolved into nothing. The French state treasury, however, got rid of its debts. The French, it's skipping every few. Sorry. Überspringt 2-3 Folien jedes Mal. Ja. Aber da ist was. Nee, das ist es nicht. Ach, scheiße. Sorry. The experiment was repeated during the French Revolution with the assignats. When the revolutionaries needed weapons and supplies to defend their cause, they issued papers that were backed by land confiscated from the church, which was 1/5 of all the territory of France. Soon there were more papers than land, and finally France had to abandon its grounded standard. By this time, though, the feudal system had been overthrown and the new social class, the bourgeoisie, was firmly established. To put it in short, paper money financed American independence, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and can have a democratizing effect provided it has backing. With financial capitalism, this has become questionable. Among the forms of certifying currency with commodities, precious metals proved of utmost longevity, paradoxically enough because their value is mainly symbolic. One can weigh gold or silver or test its fineness, but the actual value is and always was fictitious. In ancient Babylon, it was determined according to religious aspects of astronomy. Throughout antiquity and well into the Middle Ages, the exchange of gold and silver remained at 1 to 13 1/3. Why this weird relationship? Gold symbolized the sun and silver the moon, and their relative value was derived from the relationship of the orbital rotations of these celestial bodies to one another. In China and Japan, the ratio between the value of gold and silver was set no less randomly, but more pragmatically at 1 to 10. Interestingly, the ratio of capital resources and asset trade defined by Basel I corresponds quite closely to the ratio of gold and silver the Babylonian priests had derived from the planets in heaven. It's just one of many examples of the long-term memory contained in the history of money. Basel II laid down the exchange rate of 1 to 40, and that was the beginning of deregulation, and Basel III seems to be going in the same direction. In other words, the material certification of money also leaves much to be desired, and today, as we all know, only a fraction of the circulating capital has its counterpart in tangibles or the real economy. To be sure, the modern financial market claims that currency requires no backing, but there is much to indicate that abstract electronic money in particular needs certification and trust. And that brings us to the third certification of money. It emerged in Greece, the cradle of Europe, and derives from temple sacrifice. The Germanic word Geld, written with a T, actually means offering to the god, Götteropfer. The verb gelten connotes to pay back, to pay, to cost, to be worth, to requite or consummate, but also to cut into pieces. Geld or money is a tribute to be paid to the divinity. What you would have seen here is an offering dish. Geld or money is a tribute to be paid to the divinity. In English, the word gild, which actually already indicated a sacrifice community, is derived from the same etymology. And this is also true for the English word gild, written with a T. It comes from Old English and means to yield, pay for, reward, requite, render, worship, serve, sacrifice, punish, and shows that the proximity of Schuld in the sense of sin and Schulden in the meaning of debt is not restricted to the German language. What is this sacrifice about? The Greek word obolos, from which our term obolos in church, the contribution in church, comes, refers to a little meat skewer, the instrument with which members of the community partook of the sacrificial meal. These small skewers became currency. They had no material but purely symbolic value derived from their sacred function in sacrificial ceremonies. Money became a substitute for the actual sacrifice. The skewers, in turn, were replaced by coins bearing symbols of the sacrificial animals, such as bulls, horns, or instruments used in sacrifice. These coins were used for profane commerce. The first Greek coin was called obolos, just like the little skewer. In short, the actual sacrifice was supplanted by a sign of the sacrifice. Sacrifice rituals gradually receded in Greece as money gained an influence over the economy. At the same time, the symbolic quality of money determined its further development into abstraction, and this required that the reference to its credibility via sacrifice would never be lost. Sorry. And this, you can see, belongs until very modern economy. The two lines in the dollar, it should be two lines, the pound, the euro, and even the yen and the yuan, according to Alfred Kalir, are relics of the bull's horns. So you have into very modern economy and the logo of modern currency, you still have the reminder of this form of sacrifice thinking. And this even applies to the bitcoins, which we are going to hear more about. Here again, you have the two lines which refer to the bull's horns. The sacrificial cults took place in the temples of fertility goddesses like Artemis or Hera. The sacrifice offered up to the deity was intended to move her to bless the fields, livestock, and human fertility. The oldest known coins were found in Ephesus, the site of the cult of Diana or Artemis. In the temples of these fertility goddesses, the first Greek mints and banks were installed. And because the theological certification of money appeared the most secure, to this day the architecture of our banks and stock exchanges resembles that of Greek temples. The sacral appearance allowed the banks to dispense with the convertibility of their banknotes, the Bank of England being the first to do so. The more abstract money became, the more precarious its material backing, the more urgently the monetary economy insisted on theological certification. The American dollar notes bear the words, "In God we trust," and not "in gold we trust." As the symbol of the bull also shows as an emblem of the stock exchange, finance economy, when thinking of productivity until today, relies on the temple discourse of antiquity. Not just the idea of sacrifice, but also the cult of fertility was transferred to money and economy. The figure of Danae, whom Zeus impregnated in the guise of a shower of golden coins, is but one legend of this. And this is interesting because the Christian theologists use the figure of Danae to explain how Mary, without any sex, could have a child, because the word had become flesh, and so they used Zeus and Danae to show that this worked. The conversion of temples to banks was, of course, another, and the translation of sacred fertility rites to money explains why the vocabulary of finance sounds so theological, most clearly in the proximity of credo and credit, and why stock market reports contain so many biological terms derived from nature: cycle, flow, growth, circulation, productivity, and the like. And this image is interesting because on one side you have, this is from a finance page of the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and on one side it's nature that is being watered, or rather money producing nature that is being watered, and on the same side you have a child that still has to grow, which means that this idea of productivity also includes the human body in the idea. And this is interesting when you think of the role of money for genetics and reproductive medicine, which I won't be able to come back to. The Deutsche Bank takes up this tradition when it depicts its investment advisors on publicity flyers as female gardeners, quote, "who tend the delicate plants in your portfolios," end of quotation. How can money how can sacrifice certify money? This can be explained by the society of the gift, which Marcel Mauss has described. In pre-monetary societies, the circulation of gifts and counter-gifts guarantees social cohesion. The bond created in this manner banishes the danger of conflicts within and between communities. The sacrificial rites take up the principle of gift and counter-gift now in exchange with the deity. However, a sacrifice and a gift have value only when they contain the giver. Sacrifice is a matter of yielding as a pledge something of one's own, I'm quoting, something assimilated to the body or goods of the sacrificer or the group offering the sacrifice, end of quotation. In other words, when an animal was sacrificed in the temple, it actually represented and substituted a human being. The sacrificial rituals themselves refer to this. Quote, in Egypt, the seal used to mark the sacrificial animals depicted a kneeling man tied to a stake with his hands behind his back and a knife at his throat, end of quotation. The bull is the proxy of man and is sacrificed for him. And an emperor like Augustus drew their power of issuing coins not only from their own portraits, but also from this sacred backing of money. It is only from this connection that money is not merely a substitute for animal sacrifice, but itself ultimately rests on a symbolic human sacrifice, that one can understand why we continue to lend such credence to the pure sign. The ultimate authority that lends money its credibility is human life, the offerer contained in sacrifice. Now we'll try to show this with two examples. One refers to the female and the other to the male body. The female context comes from the first societies that engaged in agriculture and animal husbandry, and unlike hunter-gatherers, intervened in nature. These were the very first society to celebrate sacrificial cults. Hunters and gatherers regarded themselves as part of the flora and fauna. They had a right to nourish themselves from this bounty, even if it meant killing another creature to do so. Agrarian societies, in contrast, intervened in nature and thereby incurred a debt and guilt towards creation. And it's here that the association between guilt, debts, and guilty conscience that still determines discourse in theology, economies, and psychology today arose. In order to atone to the deity, the creator of nature, people sacrificed the first harvest or the firstborn lamb from their herd. The sacrificial rite was expressed in early knife or spade money on the one hand. You can still see a lot of them in Chinese museum, but also in shell money on the other, a currency that was used until the 20th century. As with gifts, the highest offering was the female body. As Lévi-Strauss has shown in his elaboration on Marcel Mauss' discussion of the gift, it represented the most valuable gift that a society can offer of itself. Chains of shells, which were used in payment of bride price and also circulated as currency, represented this sacrifice. For if there was no direct wife exchange, a substitute, the bride price, could be paid instead, I quote, "This money and these goods constitute the pledge that another bride will at some point be returned to the giver group," end of quotation. The female sacrifice used on this gift exchange level was performed symbolically through the domestication of female sexuality. Like nature, female fertility was subjected to a societal regulation. Symbols of this could be female genital cutting, Chinese foot binding, but it is generally intricate to the institution of marriage in which woman was denied autonomous status, especially concerning her sexuality. Why did the cowrie shell become the symbol of this form of sacrifice? Because cowrie shells strikingly resemble the female genitalia. In some parts of the world, this currency was still in use in the 20th century. Many terms and signs in Chinese writing pertaining to economy and money refer to shells, and it still appears as a bank symbol in some regions of Asia. The sacrifice referring to the male body is closer historically to our currency and is associated with minted coins. Here too, it is a matter of fertility secured by the offering. The most important sacrificial animal, the bull, stood for masculinity and was offered up in rituals of sacrifice to fertility goddesses such as Artemis. Scholars long wondered what the bubbles on the breastplate of Artemis represented. They were believed to be fertility symbols, breasts, eggs, fruits, and the like. They are fertility symbols, but not female ones. Instead, they are the testicles of the bulls sacrificed to Artemis. This was at once an act of sacrifice. Human beings offer up the most valuable things they possess, and a fertility rite. This offering implied the domestication of male sexuality. The original English word for castration, to Geld, is related to the German word for money as well as to the Guild as a sacrificial community. Male castration was a prerequisite for the fertility of money, and that, of course, Max Weber has also shown for the Protestant capitalists. The meaning of this symbolic castration is reflected in the history of the alphabet, a further indicator of the close ties between writing and money. All the letters of the alphabet are originally hieroglyphs, sacred symbols. The word alpha, originally the first and most important letter of our alphabet, is derived from the Semitic word aleph, which means bull or ox. The figure of the alpha went through many phases, beginning with a clearly recognizable bull's head. In the course of its history, the symbol was turned on its side, assimilating the meaning of the plow. A horizontal line appeared that referred to the yoke, thus to agriculture, and the castrated bull, the ox. Finally, the symbol took on anthropomorphic form, just like the Greek gods themselves. The two lines of the A, which originally marked the bull's horns, now pointed downward and represented the legs of a man standing upright. Kalir, who's written on this, quote, "The transformation of the picture of Aleph, the bull, into Alpha, replica of the human being, testifies the event. Man becomes the master of the word," end of quotation. From now on, writing as a culture of empowerment replaced the male genitals, or rather the male genitals moved up into the brain. It is no coincidence that writing instruments are described as phallic symbols, and words like pen and pencil are derived from the penis. And this is an interesting commercial I saw in the Paris Metro. Tout est changé à neuf means I want to change everything new, and as it's across his genitals, you think, well, that's what he wants to freshen up and renew. And then you see the next image, and it shows what does he get new? He gets a new computer. So that's a nice example of how the genitals go into the writing system. The symbolism of this cultural turn is visible until today in Spanish bullfights, which usually take place on days consecrated to the Virgin Mary, who inherited from the ancient fertility goddesses the facility to give birth as a virgin. In bullfighting, the bull enters the ring as a figure representing masculine sexual power. The torero appears almost fragile in contrast, which is underlined by his feminine clothing. He symbolizes the power of the mind, which is supposed to win out over sexual potency. The fight between these two principles of masculinity is what makes the excitement of both the corrida and the stock market. The underlying notion can already be found in the painted vases of antiquity, where masculine power over a wife, a hetera, or a pupil was represented as a money bag in the shape of the male genitals. Already in ancient Greece, the word semen became sema, the sign, and the male seed was transformed into money. A new and specific form of fertility ensured the minted coins of Greece were the first to produce interest, an economic form of offspring. And this goes on into the Renaissance. The wives of money changers, for instance, were considered to be barren because this was the price they paid so that their husband's money could develop its fertility and have children. How could this form of sacrifice, potency, and fertility survive for so long? To put it simply, money allied itself anew with religion. And it found in Christianity the ideal cultural breeding ground for the credibility of money. It is mainly thanks to Christian theology that money preserved the connection to its sacred backing for so long. Two factors were key here. The one was the importance that Christianity accorded to faith. The business of credit is also based on the principle of faith, a form of enforced trust. Secondly, the Christian doctrines of sacrifice and incarnation, the Word become flesh, also promoted the further development and spread of monetary economy. From the time of Constantine onwards, the Passion of Christ, which was coded as a male sacrifice, served the authorization of coins. Coins were imprinted with a portrait of Christ or the cross. In the symbol of the cross, this one for instance, as with money, sacrifice and fertility are closely allied. The so-called paradox of the cross states that the cross symbolizes sacrifice and resurrection, death and life. Only when the cross took on this dual meaning did Christians accept it as a symbol of their faith. And this is an interesting image because it links the in hoc signo of the cross with the American dollar sign. The symbolism of the cross corresponds to these two sides of money. Sacrifice on the one side as a means of certification and life, Christ as the Word become flesh on the other. When the monetary economy reasserted itself in the 13th century for the first time since antiquity, and trade and urban life experienced a new efflorescence, the host assumed the form of a coin. And this 9th century reliquary allegedly contains the foreskin of Christ. It takes the form of a money bag, recalling Greek vase painting with its money bags in the form of male genitals. Relics were the most important commodities of the early Middle Ages. For the first trade fairs emerged where there were relics. From the beginning, these were two sites of pilgrimage and commerce. And the German word Messe, which means both Mass, Holy Mass, and trade fair, until the end of the 12th century, 9 out of 10 privileges for the foundation of markets in Christian Europe were issued to the clergy. Another factor also made Christianity a suitable terrain for the further development of the monetary economy. The notion of guilt, debt, Schulden, that was peculiar to the religion. This is linked to the above described guilt for intervening in nature and violating divine rights, for which a sacrifice must be made, which in turn provides money with a link to reality, the reality of sacrifice. Now, what does this guilt principle consist of? In the Christian religion, it is not the human being who sacrifices to God, but the other way around. God sacrifices himself in the guise of his Son for humanity. This divine sacrifice implies an incredible liberation. On the one hand, Christ's one-time sacrifice, according to the doctrine, renders any further sacrifice superfluous, and human beings are absolved of their debt and guilt towards creation once and for all, a promise that allows them to overcome their inhibitions about enlarging their conquest of nature. Already the first church banks created by the Franciscans used the Passion of Christ on their promissory notes or debt certificates. And later, the Roman Catholic Church issued the indulgent letters against payment. On the other hand, the believer cannot respond to such a divine gift with a counter gift. The law of exchange does not function, and the debt that emerges can never be repaid. And it is this very relationship of debt that becomes the motor of a constant multiplication of money. It corresponds to the hope that one day there will be enough money around to pay off all the debts towards the Creator. And here we have again the proximity of Schuld and Schulden. Actually, the Latin languages allow to differentiate between guilt and debt, and yet the Italian, Our Father, does not speak of sinners, but of debitori, and so does the Old English version of the prayer according to the Bible of James I, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. All these ideas are borne along by the fantasy that it's possible to buy one's way out of guilt in an economic way. In short, it is no coincidence that the modern monetary economy and capitalism developed in the sphere of Christian culture, and that the idea of the free market arose in this region of the world. And I will just show you 4 images to finish. Le Monde has made a series of photos of what became of Italian churches. One is a bank, another is an office, a third one is a Coca-Cola producing, and a car repair shop. So you have all the different forms of capitalism in these 4 images. And I thank you for your patience. So.
Thank you very much, Christina von Braun. Thank you very much. Can you switch on the microphone? We agreed to have actually the 2 lectures together, but in case there's urgent questions now to Christina von Braun directly relating to her presentation, then I invite you now to voice them. It's actually another currency. When you presented the different currencies with the 2 lines across, there's another currency which is traded here. It's the U currency for the Utopia Stock Exchange, yes. Which is also carrying the symbols of the bull, of the ox there.
I'm liberated.
Okay. Okay, I guess you will keep the questions for the discussion we will have with both speakers afterwards. Thanks again, Christina, that was really great. And I'm also keeping my questions for later. And Michal, you as well. I would now like to introduce DENIS ROJO, also known as under his name of Jaromil. He's developer, an activist, and an artist of the DEIN.org network. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. DEIN.org? Yeah, okay. So he's based in Amsterdam, and since 2000, his works have focused on computer viruses, on piracy, freedom of speech, privacy, and independent media practices. Jaromil's software creations are recommended by the Free Software Foundation and redistributed in several GNU Linux systems worldwide, while he's also an active contributor to media theory discourses. For example, in 2009, he was the recipient of the Willem Flusser Award, now at Transmediale in Berlin, and right now he's completing his PhD on digital economies, and in his PhD he's also focusing on cryptographic systems such as Bitcoin. And actually, I found out that he's really the author of the Bitcoin Manifesto. But yesterday, when I confronted him with this finding, he said, no, of course I did not write the Bitcoin Manifesto, but it was chosen to become the Bitcoin Manifesto. So perhaps you can say something about that. Welcome, and thank you for accepting our invitation. We are very much looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Inke. Thank you. I'm absolutely honored to be invited by you here and by the city of Dortmund, so well hosted, and to speak after Professor von Braun is just embarrassing, maybe not deserved. I'll try to do my best. Today I'll try to put forward a research that I have also put into an article that you can download online. It carries the title Bitcoin, the End of the Taboo on Money. And in this research I try to avoid any universal that is economical, because I think that the narrative of Bitcoin can be consumed pretty easily and quickly, and also be judged in an early phase adopting the economical interpretation. But there is something more behind, and there is both a social, political meaning to this phenomenon and also a technological, one of the possible logos that we can develop by exploring this technique. So what I'm going to present you is an explanation, a possible explanation of what is Bitcoin, and then I will do a step back and have a look at salient, possibly interesting for us aspects of money into this discourse, and then I will pose the question whether this is the end of a taboo, or which kind of walls are we breaking with this innovation. The start of this talk is introduced by this incipit. I like to quote two authors that are extremely actual today, and one is a quote from Commonwealth, the last book of the trilogy of Negri and Hart that started with Empire, the second one was Multitude, and which has a very strong political weight on our time and in describing the start and the end, probably, of modernity as we know it. And the second quote is from Bernard Litter, Littaer, who is one of the most knowledgeable person behind the formulation of the euro money and the economy that we are adopting here in Europe. Both, I think, they point out that we need urgently to interpret what the digital immanence, what I define as an immanent force, brings to us, and in order to do so we have to get to adopt transversal trajectory of rationality and new forms of liberation. About the Bitcoin Manifesto, I inserted these slides promptly because you really are spicing it up this way. And well, yeah, I wrote a rant actually in response to a mail on NetTime back in 2011 it was, and this mail was mainly, the person I was responding to was mainly pointing out how Bitcoin can simply be, as its usage is today, a speculation bubble, even a pyramid scheme. And to this I responded that it's way too early to judge a technology when we only observe the early uses that are done of it. Obviously, at the fringes of society, what is left out of the sanitization and what is left out of the normative approach that we have to communication systems, there are people that basically live off gray economies, of illegal things, and they will always be very attentive to adopt new technologies before any other, because that's what they need. They need to live on the fringes. So it is very early, obviously, to say that Bitcoin is a good system to actually trade weapons, drugs, and homicide missions. Or nowadays, just today, there was an article on Slashdot that points out how Bitcoin can be next, the killer app for Bitcoin can be porn. Well, porn was also the killer app for internet. The most visited websites on the internet were rotten.com and playboy.com at the very beginning of the network. Maybe that tells us more on humans than on the technology itself. Horizontality and the network of trust, I think it's another main characteristic of Bitcoin. It basically highlights what is the richness today beyond the protests that we are witnessing. Most protests address the lack of trust to the top of the pyramid, whereas I would argue we might want to focus in a more creative way on the abundance of trust that is at the bottom of these pyramids. And this abundance is underlined by movements like Occupy, by social movements even before that have managed to actually exist in public space in a self-managed way and remarkably non-violent until the law enforcement came in. The end of the flow capitalism is another aspect that I like to underline into Bitcoin, the fact that actually we can go back to the ancient, not so ancient, but still to the normal, let's say, use of money that is transferring value from A to B without passing from C, without passing from a third intermediary. Since we started using digital money, so since we started using magnetic stripes on cards, money has become an asset that is just a number in the database of banks. So there is no way to actually possess physically this money unless you are going to transfer it into gold bars. And of course, we know that these minerals are symbolic and are also finite. So we had a problem in the last 50 and more years because by transferring money into the digital domain, we don't have a way to possess it. We just have to entrust databases that are centralized and therefore offer also many vulnerabilities, a worry for those that store it that way. So I think that this is all a manifestation of what I call digital immanence, which is a process that is forcing us to actually face constantly disruptive innovations, just as voice over IP was for telcos sometimes. So it is a decentralization. Bitcoin, I try to also point out the political meaning and the social motor behind Bitcoin with this graph. This is taken in the early days of its popularization. Back in 2011, there was a Forbes article that in May portrayed its actual maintainer that declared the birth of this new technology, and he was like burning some paper money, obviously not dollars. It would be illegal in the US to portray that, but it was quite a rupture. So while Gavin Anderson actually put a face together with Amir Taki, who is now sitting on the Forbes list of the under 30 future millionaires, to Bitcoin, there was also something else that was happening behind. And probably Amir have underlined this by appearing with a mohawk on his interview on Al Jazeera just 3 months ago and playing the revolutionary cyberpunk kid there. And I argue that this was the financial blockade of WikiLeaks. In the moment in which, in January 2011, WikiLeaks released the Cablegates, the second, actually, most popular release, although the activities of the organization were there even since before. So they released these Cablegates after the first popular apparition of WikiLeaks, which was the killing of journalists. I think they were Reuters journalists in Baghdad from a US Army helicopter. Then people started really digging this organization because it was emerging some injustice, as much as other organizations before WikiLeaks did, like Project Censored, for instance, that existed since the 70s, or Cryptome, a mailing list that existed since the late 80s. WikiLeaks popularized this image. And of course, the project of Julian Assange was also to nurture this organization by its popularization, so accepting donations. What happened is that Visa and MasterCard cut off the pipes to give donations to WikiLeaks. In some places, even the website was defaced and masked. Nowadays, there are still places in Asia in which at the address of WikiLeaks will appear another website, also with donations possible to be done, but not exactly to the organization. So while some organizations came to the rescue of this situation, like the Chaos Computer Club, for instance, here in Germany, hackers at large have felt that there was a fundamental betrayal happening. And the betrayal was a betrayal to network neutrality. There was not a due process, there was not a legal decision to this cutoff. And actually for everyone was evident that we cannot rely on a network that is not regulated in a neutral way. So many people thought at that point that the natural thing to do was to build a new network and to use new technologies for it. And I think that it's visible that at that time, the first exchange of Bitcoin started really appearing. The miners started really selling these assets. And the variation in differential that is pointed out below happened right in those days. Another aspect that I like to point out in Bitcoin is the passion. What actually builds up currency is definitely some elements of liturgy and some sacrifice. And in this case, some martyrs. In Bitcoin have been inscribed many messages that are very dear to hackers. This is just an example, an homage given to Len Sassaman that unfortunately left us in 2011, who is also a key figure in the development of cryptographic anonymity systems already back in the 90s. And of course, because hackers like a lot trolling and lulz, also an ASCII Bernanke was inserted in the blockchain. This message cannot be removed. It's actually part of the Bitcoin blockchain that sprouts out of the Genesis block. So any message that is inscribed in the blockchain of Bitcoin can't be removed anymore without violating the integrity of the system. There are also some Bible messages inscribed by some people that are into that. Another thing that actually contributed to the growth and popularization of Bitcoin is the protest, as I said, the movement of Occupy. This is a picture of the Occupy protests in Amsterdam 2 years ago, have adopted very early this symbology. Both Anonymous and Bitcoin is shown, besides a pig, a donation pig. Of course, these protests were also addressing the dramatic cultural funding cuts that we have witnessed in the last 2 years in the Netherlands. So what is becoming now Bitcoin on top of all this powerful growth is several things. Of course, there is a gamification of this system, so people are trying to actually play between each other, finance new ventures, and even be even more represent more ruptures, just like as the project of 3D printing guns in its early phase associated itself to Bitcoin, or as some people thought it was a good idea to provoke policymakers by putting up some homicide marketplaces on the Tor network. On the other side, we have a very wild speculation bubble, as many can recognize, and many people in the Bitcoin community are against this. Of course, this doesn't help at all to stabilize the currency, and also it doesn't help to realize one of the projects that the community have for the currency, for it to become an easy way to actually exchange value online, so to open shop in a very easy way and without intermediaries, possibly without even paying PayPal or any other processor. Another interesting phenomenon that spawned is the altcoins, the alternative coins. There are many. The first ones were joking on the concept of Bitcoin. The first one actually was Namecoin, which dreamed of having a distributed domain name system, so to unlock the internet from this other pyramid scheme that is governed by authorities that release domain names and bind them to IP addresses. And Others were joking about the symbology of bitcoins. My favorite was the Cosby coin, which portrayed our beloved Bill Cosby adopting bitcoins on the coins. And many more experiments that are still flourishing. One most recent one that actually can help also to understand what is really Bitcoin is Twister. It was started by one of the former developers of the Xine project, and it tries to realize a distributed Twitter system that cannot be centralized on one single server. It's basically refusing to use the blockchain as a system for exchanging values. It could be also a system to exchange and mark contracts in time, but it's actually using it just to store messages. And these messages can be never put off, as I showed the one before, the internet. So I'd like to make a step back after showing you what is Bitcoin briefly, Bitcoin today, and have a reflection on what is capitalism and what are the problems that we are facing with capitalism today. To come to the question in which sense Bitcoin can be useful to us in this situation. So to understand capitalism and the failure of capitalism, I think we have to make a step back and understand why capitalism, one of the reasons, in my opinion, capitalism was born. I adopt for this the book of Deleuze and Guattari, Anti-Oedipus, which also describes, as Maurizio reminded me yesterday, a very interesting formulation for money, but also described the birth of capitalism as the breaking of codes. So what capitalism did when it came in, it basically broke the relationship of repetition that every human had to its ancestors. We can envision it also as a breaking of the caste system. What the American dream came to tell us is that you can become whoever you want if you work hard and you earn money, and this is the very basis of the motivation to work in our society. In doing so, we basically established a quantitative relationship between labor and capital, also defined axiomatic. So there is no more quality that says there is no more a qualitative relationship between the humans and their work and their role into society, but it's just quantity. Quantity is governed, of course, by accounting science. And accounting, well, I like to call it science. We should actually dig more into accounting systems. It's a very old system. This is a picture of Luca Pacioli, a friar in Venice that wrote a Tractatus in Vulgar Latin back in 1492. And he was portrayed by Jacopo de Barbari here together with Albrecht Dürer. Many people recognize him in this picture as also a person passionate in geometry and magics. Even before Luca Pacioli, Kotrulević, another friar in Croatia, described the double book entry system, which we still use. And what this system is there for is just to keep one as one, just to keep two as two. So we need to be sure that there are no duplicates. There is no creation or destruction of the unities we use. Otherwise, the whole system breaks. There is no more neutrality. We cannot rely on it. And so money became such a strong medium. Money as the medium, the most used medium in the world, that put us in a very embarrassing situation. Here I quote Georg Simmel, whom in the Philosophies des Geldes in 1900 described money as the real element in economy, as humans became a mediated, an indirect being, and money is the real object that connects us to our desires. Another author that I could quote here could be Herbert Marcuse from the Frankfurt Schule, who described well these kind of relationships in the one-dimensional man. So what became this axiomatic relationship between capital and labor is something well described by this metaphor, an ancient metaphor, the one of the mechanical Turk, which may ring a bell in the digital savvy people here by connecting us to the more modern system, which is the mechanical Turk on Amazon. What Amazon did with the mechanical Turk is basically build a system in which you can describe a flow, like a Fordist chain flow of labor, in which that is put online, and you can propose it to anyone on the web and propose to pay the interaction with this work on the computer. So one could work to actually identify whether these pictures are originals, they are black and white or color, things that machines cannot do. Even Amazon describes it as an artificial intelligence, suggesting that humans could be substituted by artificial intelligence in the future, but they are solving a marginal task nowadays. And it's paid with money. So you can crowdsource this work. Some artists even did commentaries on this. And what is most interesting is that these works are crowdsourced outside most often of the Western world, because the cost of life of people is much lower. So many people in India or in Africa or in Asia are actually adopting these and other systems of crowdsourcing to gain money, while for us it's very advantageous because the financial system values as an irrisory value their time and their life. So we are playing on this differential, and while we are doing this, humans and their bodies are being dissolved into machines. So in modern times, we also have clear the fact that our representation, the representation of our affections, of our desires, of what we dig, of what we like, and of what we tweet is of value for the financial market. Many ventures in industrial era, in post-industrial era in capitalism have actually needed to predict desires of people. The first industry that developed this kind of technology is the airplane industry, the flight industry. And it's not a coincidence that the first complementary currencies in modern era are actually built by flight industries, the miles, the mile credits. They are done because money can be, in this case, a mean to actually predict people's desires in the future. And this is necessary because you need to fill up a plane that you're going to fly with very high costs. And if it's half empty, then being an optimist is not enough. So, in this situation, what Bitcoin can help exactly? I doubt that Bitcoin can be the solution to all our problems. And this is easy to play wise, I guess, nowadays by saying so. But it must be maybe refrained, because on the wave of enthusiasm for another disruptive innovation that offers indeed a lot of new place in the market and in the new industries and in the new economies for young people, yet is not a solution to the stall that capitalism is presenting to us. And if we don't understand this, we risk just to perpetuate the cycle of crisis in which we are going through, which is intensifying and getting faster and faster. What Bitcoin really is, I try to point out in this last part of my presentation, is impacting a number of aspects. First of all, it's a grassroots instance. It's a grassroots movement. And for a moment, I would invite you to suspend your judgment, whether it's good or evil. But even communities like gamblers online, like poker players that adopted very early Bitcoin, found it a good technology because they needed to disintermediate their relationship to providers of the services, of the tables, of the game tables they were using. These people just wanted to sit around a virtual table without a third party providing it, without a third party taxing their game. They wanted to be independent. So disintermediation and decentralization is a big motor And actually, for innovation today, and it's something that grassroots communities quickly adopt to actually build their new territories. Network neutrality, as I show, it's a fundamental concept. Of course, many philosophers, and I tend to agree with them, would argue that there is not total neutrality as much as there is no complete purity. But at least the idea of it, when we are building infrastructure in which people have to play their own desires and their own business, we need to nurture this idea. We need to nurture the idea that the telephone infrastructure is neutral. We need to nurture the idea that governments are at least defending themselves and free from the espionage of other governments, and they are granting their people, the people that sign their social contracts, some independence and some neutrality on their grounds. It's an old discussion for those that are busy in the digital industries. Of course, the last mile discussion and the property of the pipes, of telecommunication pipes, and the negotiation, the political and economic negotiation behind that, it's a very hot topic still nowadays. Migrant economies are a crucial part of our society. We wouldn't be here in such a beautiful building, and probably many of the industries that have flourished here in Germany wouldn't be there if there wouldn't be migrants to work for them, both from other parts of Germany and from other parts of the world. It is so for us in all Europe. We are actually capitalizing a lot on that work power. And they are, while they are very crucial, they are held by the leash of some speculation as well. If they like, as they all like, most of them, to send money back to their families where they come from, they have to pay huge costs. To MoneyGram or Western Unions or such oligopolies, they apply up to 20% taxation on the change rates of their currencies. The general sentiment is a reference to a recent paper written by Adam Arvidsson, and it is an interesting exploration of how this market of desires and this quantifying of desires and clicks and likes is actually relevant to new economies. And this intermediation is obviously a word that those that are busy with public sector are familiar with. So the visions I propose behind that could be the vectors of innovation spawning out of the technology, the triple-signed accounting system technology, the cryptographic blockchain technology that is behind Bitcoin are these, put just bluntly and quickly: energy grid integration, the fact that the Bitcoin represents a one-to-one proof of work once we set the mining process into one device, to energy consumption. It could be a very interesting medium for actual renewable energies and their traveling and storage. Rewarding algorithmic research is also interesting. Bitcoin has a very, as a meaningless algorithm, authentication proof of the algorithm, which is just hashing functions that produce numbers with a certain sequences of zeros. But actually there are new coins, new altcoins that have invented ways to make that useful. Primecoin, for instance, was born a few months ago, and in its first 15 days of existence reached to break the world record of the longest prime number known to humanity. It broke the 12-sequence Cunningham, and after shortly, it broke also the 13-sequence Cunningham. And the quest is going on. Cryptographers are well aware how useful it is to have such long prime numbers at hand. Steering shared assets is another vision that some researchers and developers are bringing on. For instance, ProtoShares are developing these distributed corporation systems in which those that are holding coins have a say and can invest in new ventures, and the cryptographic message system of the blockchain is they are trying to use it to actually share assets and steer the decisions on what to do on these assets. What is most relevant also and evident to the Bitcoin community is the microfinancing opportunities. So what Bitcoin is breaking down is the marginal costs to enter, to open shop, to enter market, to offer your wares to the world. All those costs so far have been charged to the marketers, to the merchants, and not to their customers. Of course, customers are sacred and we must please them in our way, but those that enter business and try to produce, try to be creative today have a very hard life through bureaucracy, through dealing with institutions, and also with taxation. So what Bitcoin can create is really like this agility of creating point of sales. And gray economies, of course. Gray economies are a motor of society, and ignoring them is impossible. So in various shades of grays, they are present, and they are exploiting already this technology, and they are finding a lot of place in there. The challenges that I like to highlight, therefore, are those. Useful proof of work algorithms that actually use well that energy transformed into computation, and building socially sound economies, which maybe hackers are not best at, although we do have a form of social exchange, but it's sometimes seen as autistic from the outside. It's important, and I think we need to study more from the social interpretation of what economy is, was, and will be. And the corporate waste management, of course, is a problem that we are faced today. We need to really find a way to actually liberate ourselves from the corporate way of thinking, and all these people need to be rehabbed or put in pension, basically. Bitcoin was swarmed by corporate thinking. They just are playing speculation on it, and they are appealed by this new form of liberation. But what this new form of liberation really is made by the people, is grassroots, and we should keep it and interpreting it and developing it from the grassroots. I conclude this keynote with a sad note. I like to point out a researcher that recently disappeared and can teach us much more than I said about building socially sound economies. Margaret Kennedy, who was a teacher in Hamburg, left us on the 28th of December, almost this year. And she was the author of Interest-Free Economies, and demurrage implementations. And I think her research is really valid and has been valid already for many economists in the past. Maybe Freicoin is an interesting implementation of this, and I find her the best researcher to actually comment on what is the inheritance of the ideas behind Silvio Gesell on demurrage and on fast circulation of money to avoid capitalization. Thank you.
Jaromil, thank you. Thanks a lot. We are running a bit late, but now we will take our time to discuss both lectures. So I invite you both up to the stage. We have 4 chairs, and you as well, Michal. Yeah, and there's also a chair for me, actually. So please take a chair. Follow me. Yeah. No, we have. There's even a 5th microphone today. So there's a separate microphone for the audience. Yes.
This is Hartware.
Let me just mention some interesting things I learned from Christina von Braun's lecture. What I found very interesting, I mean, I have been raised in a kind of Catholic context. The coin, the hostia. Actually, only today I realized that what you are getting during the Mass is the body of Christ in the form of a coin, and you're eating that coin. You're devouring the money, right? And it somehow came as a shock when I realized what we were doing.
You don't go to church often enough.
No, I don't go to church anymore. I did that as a child, and it was funny, and the coins tasted well, you know? It was fine. So that's something I realized. I remember Jaromil speaking about the Genesis blog. I want to ask you what the Genesis block is. It seems to have something to do with a generation of bitcoins. It's very interesting that it's called the Genesis block because, again, there's a reference to Christianity, right?
To the Bible.
Sorry, to the Bible, yeah, to the Bible.
It includes Judaism.
My question, and really to how to link both of your presentations, really, is the fact that Christina von Braun, you're talking about in your book, you're talking about the question, or you're saying that money is validated by the human body, ultimately. And Jaromil, in your text, which I read previously to the presentation, you are also mentioning biopolitical aspects of Bitcoin. And I think it would be very interesting to talk about these aspects and how those aspects can be found in both of your fields of research, right?
Yes, that's a point I couldn't get at all, to how the modern form of symbolic sacrifice takes place. I mean, after the Lehman breakdown, 6 million people lost their job and their home, so you have a social kind of death. But for instance, you also have the 4 biggest raw material trading companies are now having their headquarters in Switzerland, close to the capital. And ever since that has happened, they are less interested in the production of nourishment, but more interested in shortages. They are speculating on hunger, and they hope that with that nourishment of people and famines will raise the prices of the raw materials and especially of food in different regions. So you have a lot of ways how the human body is paying the price in this sacrificial sense, and you could say that those that act with money should actually be paying the price, but they have delegated it to others. So this is what happens in modern economy. And one more point, what Jaromil said is that the first to use this kind of electronic direct system were porn, and was trade in guns, etc. And this is very, very interesting because you can see that there is a parallel between the abstraction of money and the possibility, the construction of weapons. They have become more deadly as money becomes more abstract. There's really a counter movement of how the body is destroyed on one side and money becomes more abstract and unseen. And then on the other side, you also have the possibility of money, or the way money is flowing now into biopolitics, into the construction of nature, into the construction of the human body itself with reproductive medicine, with genetics, etc. And you have the fantasy that you can produce enough money in order to recreate not only nature but man himself. And this is really one of the fantasies of biopolitics. And you could, it's interesting, for instance, there was a process in the United States of a surrogate mother who wanted to keep the baby after the 9 months, and the parents who had asked her to have this baby for them, they were having a trial against each other. And finally the court decided that the person who has paid for surrogacy is to be considered the natural mother. I mean, this is really extraordinary. If you think this consequently to the end, this means that money becomes the father and mother of human bodies. And this is exactly the fantasy we're talking about in money and biopolitics. And I'd be really interested in the links you make to
they are not really explored in depth in my article, but the quote, probably the quote of Christian Marazzi is the most important one, which I go by memory, says that after the cycle of conflicts that we are witnessing, in which the multitude has to inscribe its body inside language, and money also can be taken as such a medium, as such a language, we will see the next wave of conflicts in which the multitude will try to represent its body beyond language. And this beyond language maybe will mean also creating new languages. So creating new forms of rationality, of liberation, and then maybe this is what we are witnessing with Bitcoin, the refusal of inscribing your work, time, identity into this axiomatic system that has failed to deliver its own promises, and then actually building new languages, or maybe not, but still we are still in a Dadaist, in a lullative phase for this creation of language, I would say, with Bitcoin, but that is a kind of tendency that I see. And about the genesis, well, it's that is how was called by the pseudonymical authors Satoshi Nakamoto in his paper, and also in its code. In the code, the string is called Genesis block. And it's just a string, but you need to start from a sequence of numbers or letters or characters to bootstrap the blockchain. And it is a kind of secret origin of every coin. So every altcoin, what it's doing is actually changing this Genesis block to what they like, to actually recreate a new blockchain. And the one of Bitcoin reports the title of the Wall Street Journal before the second bailout of banks. So I don't remember exactly the quote, but it's interesting that it's using also the title of a newspaper with a date, because that is what we can actually use to mark a truth in time, a strong enough, a resilient enough truth in time to refer to.
Well, maybe so please.
The first speaker of this conference, Ulrike Herrmann, wrote a pretty harsh critique on the Bitcoin money, as far as I know. And since she's not here, as far as I see, I want to repeat one of the main questions she's posing, and it's the question of seigniorage in the Bitcoin system. Who's making the profit of issuing the money? And she claims that this is never clarified by those who propose the Bitcoin currency. And I think the second argument she makes is that the main idea behind the Bitcoin system is kind of a classical liberal economic thing of getting money out of so making money to something that can't be manipulated by a political body, like a government. So to get money out of something we as citizens can willingly put any influence on. So transforming money into a machine instead of claiming money as something like what you proposed, the multitude might want to do to find a new expression of itself. I think there's a misunderstanding if you are claiming Georg Simmel, Christian Marazzi, Antonio Negri, whoever else for the project you are proposing, because it's in the core it's a classical liberal one. Making money into something naturalized that cannot be willingly manipulated. I just want to quote David Graeber that having a currency that is not dependent on a certain social relation is a condition that is preferred by warlords. So it's not ideal for solidaric community, but for a community that is prepared to be ripped apart, and somebody who's ripping it apart wants to have some guarantee that the parts he's ripping will have some value afterwards.
Well, my premises are that I refuse economical narration. First of all, because economy is not a science. We have many different types of narration in economy. We have political economy, we have financial economy, and I think that the narration that is built on this technology is not interesting me. It's a technological, first of all, and a technoethical analysis that I'm trying to approach. So I don't contemplate really the use of Bitcoin as money as it is done today, or the mainstream narrative of it, describing it as a apolitical. They use the Americans, John Matonis, the director of the Bitcoin Foundation, uses this term of it to oppose it to fiat money, which linguistically it's very hard to explain to myself. I don't follow that narrative simply. So I leave to economists their own dispute about their own narrative and their own word, because this is indeed the construction of a new field for language. So maybe the cryptographic blockchain will be used for other things and not just changing it to euros or dollars, something that I don't advise to do. Also because by doing so, you inherit the same problems of those systems inside your system. And you inherit also a lot of economists bitching about what you're doing. And so, yeah, I just try to look forward to what will become, and this, how can be used as a tool for those that were in from the beginning. And there was definitely a social instance. What I'm showing with the WikiLeaks financial blockade is a social instance and is a social sense that unites people in a quite transversal way.
I think this is a very important question you're putting, the relation between money and society, the way money can destroy society but can also link the members of a society. But this is not new. This was there from the very beginning. When money started circulating, you had for the first time rulers that could pay mercenaries, and you had rulers that were not legitimized by dynasty or by whatever, but were only legitimized by being able to pay soldiers. With money, you have a new job, which is the mercenary, and you have prostitutes. You have prostitution for the first time, so you pay for bodies. And this is exactly the same that is will be coming up with the Bitcoin. Can money create solidarity, or does money create individuals that dominate others? And it's the question we will have to ask for every new etape of money.
I have a sort of comment and question to Jaromil. There is this quote attributed to one of Rothschilds: "Give me control over country's money and I care not who makes its laws." And I totally appreciate the idea of the need for having a sort of independent money and autonomous control over money production. However, I have serious doubts or reservation about Bitcoin particularly becoming this sort of solution. For various reasons. I think there's a problem similar to the problem of open source operating systems, is that they require a certain degree of technical proficiency that most users do not have and will never have. If you want to install any distribution of Linux, you have 90% of chances that you will have to install some additional driver, because most configurations don't work with default software distribution. And this is the same, well, my experience with altcoins, I just sort of tried it out of curiosity, is that you really have to know how to operate your computer, how to expand your hardware, how to install additional GPU, how to run programs in command prompt, and so on and so on. So this is a barrier. This is also a sort of capital that you have or you don't have. It's a symbolic capital, knowledge, how to operate your machine. And this creates barriers, social barriers. And another doubt that I have, and maybe this is the question, is that there is a problem not so much of speculation. There is a problem of speculation on currency, but also a problem of speculation on hardware. If you have $10,000, you can get a machine that has got 250 gigahash per second, and you can earn money on bitcoins. If you just want to use your normal computer that costs 300 euros, your laptop or something, you will get 5 cents per day, something like this right now. So material inequalities outside of Bitcoin system translate directly into inequalities within the Bitcoin system. So it does not create any alternative, it rather follows the patterns that we observe in our everyday social reality. So question would be, because to the best of my knowledge, there is a difference between altcoin systems. Like for instance, Litecoin appears to be more resilient to this kind of manipulations because it's a different type of equation. So when you just said that it's not necessarily Bitcoin that's going to become this system, do you think it's a question of some technical innovation or a social innovation or political body that would, political subjectivity that would control the system? What kind of next step do we need to really have some sort of political advantage out of this system?
Of course, it's not only one element. The problem that you pose, of course, I share some doubts about Bitcoin itself as an implementation when it's described as an economical system. But the problem that you pose about its usability doesn't exist. Every technology on which industry has been based has made many people busy in making it accessible. So when the technology comes in, it's not accessible immediately to everyone. We have many schools of designers and of all kinds of disciplines and many expertise, and you have to put people together to actually make it something. So that differential actually creates the opportunity for business. So yeah, Bitcoin is not in this sense something that just like delivers a product. And of course, I mean, there is nothing easy in cryptography, and there will never be. Maybe there can be an interface that makes cryptography easy, but even then, your habits are your enemies. So I don't think that is a problem. That's how things go, and we can't complain about that. I mean, it is up to us to actually ally with the right people to actually conquer and appropriate technologies and among us. So it's a technical, it's a political, it's a social question, and whether you bind with other people and on which basis.
Just a short sentence. In the history of money, and I think this applies too to the Bitcoin currencies, it's very often the outsiders that know how to work the things most quickly. And they are usually not the rich ones. Sometimes they become rich, but they are outsiders because they're standing outside of society and because they are not integrated to the economic system. So I don't think you can only answer to this question by the price of a computer, but also with a certain way of considering yourself to take a step outside of society and to be able to understand how the system works because you are not part of society. And this has historically always worked. Those working with money were the outsiders, and then they gradually started introducing new systems of economic thinking and became important people. And this applies, I think, also to the group of people working on Bitcoins, to not all, of course, but to quite an extent.
I see some difficulties to connect your both narratives to the reality of financial markets, especially the role of debt. To exemplify, in your Christina von Braun, in your account, you take a traditional narrative of money, how it was created, and so on, and you enhance it in a quite fascinating way. I really like it. But in the end, you end in a point, okay, and then we have to pay back the debt. So we're operating in a. So basically, we are ignoring the fact that our money that we circulate with is unpaid debt, and of course, it's other people's debt that we pay with. And the whole narrative that could extend along that, so to say, unpaid prolongation, as Derrida, or Aufschub, as Derrida paid, the unpayment of debt, is not really taken into account. That's also why the bills of exchange do really not play a role in that narrative. And that somehow, I have the impression, promotes a notion of money that is very conservative and that traditional, and that actually would never serve to so to say, to explain or even to reframe the current state of fiat money and financial innovations and financial industry that we have to deal with. That's the one point. The other point, when it comes to Bitcoin, is a similar thing. Also, the programmers thought a lot about how to implement a payment system, but they didn't spend that much thinking about how to so to say, how to deal with the reality of debt money and of that type of money. And I think they ran into a block that, in terms of media history, would describe when a new medium appears. First, it does is to re-implement the old medium. Like, okay, now we have the internet and whatnot, and we have to install something that is money in the internet. We have to map the money on the internet. But that's only the first step. The second step would actually ask, what does the internet do to that social relations? And maybe there's a different way than money to, to frame or to build a system of exchange that does not necessarily have to build on that old, so to say, old notion of money.
I understand that you're talking of Graeber's notion of debt. What I think Graeber is really underestimating, if he estimates it at all, is the whole religious part of the debt system, where the whole notion of guilt comes into. This he does not talk about at all. And that gives quite a different answer to the whole debt business. You're not trying to get out of your debts. I'm not talking of economic debts, but I'm talking of this guilt business, about the guilt of having sinned against nature. And this is what man is trying to get rid of by producing more and more money. This is the point I was trying to make. And I think you just have to think of the two things closely linked together, guilt and debt at the same time, which the German language makes it even easier to think of as closely linked. And I think Christian theology after having invented the exculpation once and for all through the sacrifice of God, has basically made the problem much greater still. And that is the point I was trying to make. I was talking of this guilt business, which we try to resolve with the Schulden business.
I'm not referring to Graeber. There's lots of theories of modern monetary theory, like Randall Wray, that had the Graeber issue was known quite before Graeber. But it's rather that my problem is rather that so to say the conventional narrative of money as something that is created and that we have to pay back is simply doesn't picture the reality of financial markets where debt itself is a means of payment. And by promoting that traditional narrative, and also Graeber in the end, after rediscovering a source of debt before money, in the end is not really up to the, so to say, most recent economical theories, of course. And if you look at that, you promote one promotes a very old-fashioned narrative that really doesn't help to get what's going on in the financial market.
I'm sorry, but if you think of economic theory outside of religion, you will not get to this point. That is exactly why I'm bringing across, why I went back all the way to the first sacrifices, because that is sort of the original sin, if you like. And you must include this idea. I think you will never resolve the whole economic theory of debt by excluding this other part of it.
That is why I mentioned economy is not a science.
Yeah, of course, it's very close to religion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any more questions, Matteo?
Sorry, there was a question here. Yes, yes.
I was just going to dwell into Graeber a little more, because he's elaborating hundreds of pages on this connection of debt and religion. And well, one of the things is he is discussing this idea of this Greek sacrifice and money, and he later on rejects it based on the Chinese and the Indian experience, as far as I know. And there's a point he sees in Christianity and Islam when there are monotheistic religions coming up to deal with the problems that hard money coordinated societies faced before. So there's a model of different phases of money, of rather a credit-based money or a hard currency, a gold, silver money. And based on this model, there's a connection we can draw to the Bitcoin experience, because Bitcoin, in my understanding, tries to build up some kind of hard currency that is not a debt-based money, and that's a condition for warfare. And there are different phases in society, as Graeber puts it. But you don't disagree. You don't agree with a model of different phases, but you, Christina von Braun, but you build up one line of development, starting with a very material backing up and going on to a more and more abstract backing up, but it's not.
I started with the three forms of money backing, and I started with the authority, which is a sign system, the portrait of the ruler or Pallas Athene or whatever. So there already you have a sign system backing up the money. It's quite a mythological. It has no material basis at all, except for people trust in God or trust in the emperor, whatever. It's so it's already something based on quite a mythological thing. And the material basis was the least backing money ever had. It was used, and that's why you have the shekel, meaning weighing, and you have pekos, pecunia, and these forms of reference to material basis. But that has always been the least important of the three ways of backing money.
Even Bernard Littaer, when discussing nowadays about what we can do in this impasse, in this phase in which we are of capitalism, points out that we should stop talking about economy and start talking about governance. It's the administration of power that we have to look at, and not the medium or the engineering of the medium. So maybe, and that's why also Bitcoin is not the solution to it, and why these economical analyses are not useful unless they are rooted into the administration of power.
Matteo, the last question.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question specifically for Jaromil, going back to what I consider today probably the main religious sacrifice behind money, that is labor. So what's very interesting for me in the Bitcoin is like what's traditionally is considered the universal equivalent of labor. In the case of Bitcoin is considered, I mean, the nature and the mining of Bitcoin is originated by computing power. So there is a very interesting topic to discuss politically, economically, philosophically, how somehow the idea of labor as general, of the universal generator of money is translated in Bitcoin, and that place is taken by computing power. And that is a kind of something esoteric or hermetic, no, right, that you didn't explain, and usually it's not explained. But for me, this is full of, political consequences. And also the other question I have for you is like precisely which kind of alternative currency is Bitcoin if speculation is still possible, right? So, I mean, we can envision a world where Bitcoin is managed to replace traditional money. But of course, if speculation is still possible, if precisely financial operation and all the other debt tricks are still possible, this currency is not producing a new world. I mean, it's like repeating probably, old capitalistic anthropology.
So it's precisely the point, the proof of work, the labor discussion, the relationship of power that establishes that you have done the work and you have done it well and you deserve a rewarding. it's so contested that Bitcoin just delivers it into the work of a machine, and it's an algorithmical binding, and that is precisely what it does. You can't break its authentication because it can prove that you have done the work and you have deserved that coin. It binds the proof of work to the very mechanism of authentication. So there is not anymore a building with thick walls and armed guards on the perimeter and a secret process of printing, but there is a distributed network that recognizes that as work. So this cascade relationship of power that we have in the minted money system and its distribution is completely rediscussed. And to go forward, definitely we have to concentrate on what is work, what we consider work, and how we reward it. And that's why I quote Marazzi, because I'm not giving you solutions, but he did define already in '92 with the Posto de Calzini what is the crisis of capitalism, why we don't value anymore work of people that should be valued, and why we are rewarding what Maurizio called the material labor with value that should be elsewhere probably, or more equally distributed.
My question also was technical. Sorry, Jeremy, in the sense that if I understood well, in Bitcoin, Bitcoin translate a computing power of a distributed network, right? And that can be used in that sense.
That is rational for hackers, but
okay.
It cannot be rational
but
for
for me it's interesting precisely because this is the labor of a machine, not of a human being. You understand that? Yeah. So for me, it's very interesting how the labor of a machine is becoming the universal generator within this kind of ontology.
I invite you to go even farther. It's not only the labor of a machine, it's the labor of those that have produced the machine, of who has set up the machine, and those that are producing the energy to make the machine run. So what actually is the proof of work of the generation of that energy.
Of living labor, in the end. Yes, even if computer power is something more abstract and something to stay on top of that.
Unless it's used to buy guns, of course.
Yeah. If you let me, closing questions, well, to both of you. One is concerning Chris, because I didn't get it well, I think. But do you think that capitalism has brought innovation into the money thing, or it rather exploited its previous potential?
No. I mean, if you understood this as criticism of money, no, I'm not at all. I think that money has very positive sides, and that's why I try to explain that the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, American independence, all depended on innovation of money, paper money in this case. So I think capitalism is a very innovative, and especially capitalism in this money sense is an innovative form. I see, though, one very big difference. If you think of Marx and the accumulation of capital he describes, you have living labor force that is turned into capital for somebody else. What happens with financial capitalism is that you do not lead living labor force, but you need those that are excluded. So you need the symbolic death of people to certify money, or those that lose their jobs, or that don't get enough food anymore because of the speculation of finance capitalism. And that, I think, is quite a new quality compared to industrial capitalism. This not really needing labor force, but needing those, Zygmunt Bauman calls them die Verworfenen. I don't know exactly what the English term would be, but those that are excluded in order to, those that pay the price of money.
Yeah, and Jaromil, if you don't have to answer this question really, but you were talking about politics made in a way of making an algorithm or a system that would support certain change, but politics more classical. Do you think that hackers are, if they mobilized politically, as they did around WikiLeaks, as they did against Visa, and do you think that they are powerful, that they could threaten, or corporate and governmental institutions are much more powerful and the damage that potentially could be done to them is minor? How do you assess it?
There are two different domains. I mean, hackers are powerful on the digital because it's their territory.
Yeah,
And as every native, they know much better their territory. So that is an asymmetrical warfare situation in which you can come with big and advanced tanks and you cut off everything. But hackers are already studying mesh networks and how to circumvent actually situations of crisis. And testing them and aiding situation of disconnectivity, and they are ready to build another internet if necessary. Probably we are already on the turning point. So there they are powerful, but in the domain of the physical bodies and analog, obviously we are in another domain, and this is a very dangerous negotiation as it's developing nowadays. So I am very happy that I've seen many people engaging a discussion about cyber peace rather than cyber war. Jeremy Zimmerman and others have talked about it in a recent past. And we must start to counteract the obscene language of nation states that are dying and investing into funds for cyber war with a notion of cyber peace. And this operation starts first from our language. We have to start talking about peace between the digital and the analog and starting seeing opportunities there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have to use the opportunity to finish the discussion, although it's so super interesting. I thank you both for your wonderful contributions.